This past weekend, my local game store hosted a Set 4 Ursula's Return Set Championship for Disney Lorcana, and I was scammed out of my prize card. Well, not actually, so sorry for all the clickbait. But as a TCG that attracts a lot newer audience to card games and competitive tournaments altogether, I think it's still worth to share my story just so you know what to look out for if you are currently competing, especially if your local scene is super competitive like mine is here in Central Florida. Now, going into the event on Saturday, we had a general idea of how many points we would need to secure via wins in order to make it to the top 8. Being just a 24-person tournament, at the bare minimum, we would have to win 3 games in order to get 9 points and have a shot at making it into the top 8 with some tiebreakers. Anything greater than 3 wins pretty much secured your place into the top 8. What I didn't realize is that my store not only has a former Magic the Gathering Pro Tour competitor, but also has some pretty serious Disney Lorcana players, with 4 people that ended up in the top 8 being competitors that have competed in Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, Georgia, and the Chicago challenges. So the odds in general of us making it to top 4 to get a prize card weren't the greatest, but we still performed very well against a very stacked room. And if we had a couple draws go a little bit better than the worst case scenario that we were pulling, we most likely would have been in the top 8, competing for that 1 win and get a prize card scenario. Now, here's the PSA that I want to make for anyone competing in or looking to compete in a future set championship for Disney Lorcana, especially in more active areas. You are going to get a lot of people who really do the math and try to put themselves in the best position to make it to the top cut. For set 5, the prize cards are being extended out to all top 8 competitors. So this might be something that we start to see even more unless a rules change comes into effect, similar to how they did for the Disney Challenge events, where you get bonus points for winning both your matches. So what happened? We ended up going 3-2 in our games, and 2 of the games that we had won 2-0, while the third game that we won 2-1. This got us to 9 points and put us in a really good position with tiebreakers, as we had some 2-0 victories under our belt. But when we got to round 4, I instantly realized that everyone in the top 4 tables weren't actually playing the game. And if you're familiar with competitive TCG events, this is pretty standard. What happens here is, since there's no bonus for winning both of your games as it stands right now in set championships, a player with 3 wins, 1 loss, and a tie will have 1 extra point compared to someone who played through all their games and went 3-2. So once you make the top tables, a lot of people end up doing the math, and it actually just ends up being more worth it to not play and skip around than it is to risk it to better your seed in the top table bracket. Unfortunately for people like us that got bad matchups early on, my only 2 losses came from people that placed in the top 4, but because I got them early on and I had a bad matchup with them, I was left on the outside looking in when round 5 ended and all the points were tallied. So just be aware, if there are no rule changes to prevent this, this is something that most likely will happen at your local events as well. Unfortunately, unless there are specific measures to prevent this, it is a pretty commonplace for this to happen, because at the end of the day, you want to put yourself in the best position to advance, and it's really hard to sit there across the table from your opponent and say, no, I don't want both of us to get into the top 8. I want to knock you out and advance my position. So unless you have some really, really moral high ground players in your scene, unfortunately, this is something to expect going forward. Now, I want to get that out of the way at the beginning of the video, just in case I clickbaited you and got you watching. If you're interested in how all my matchups went, I'll go through them now. I'll timestamp them down below as well. And then I'll also highlight some of the cool variations that I saw in meta decks and one super far out there deck that I played against. So let's take a look at that now. So to this tournament, I took my Sapphire Steel Kit Cloud Kicker deck that I've been showing on the channel. My initial thoughts for taking this deck over my Emerald Amber deck were, a lot of the decks were trying to counter Bucky. As I know for sure, in my scene, we have more than a few Emerald Steel players, and we have even more Ruby Amethyst players. So dealing with the constant targeted removal was something that we had to play into. And because Kit Cloud Kicker, both versions of him have Ward, my idea was I was going to be able to skate around some of the things like Madame Medusa, skate around your Maleficent's Dragon, and nullify most of the actions that Steel could take against us. In our first matchup, we played against Emerald Steel. It was the classic Bucky discard deck with all the bells and whistles. And what do you know, we actually ended up winning the dice roll So we went first. Now, first game of the day, it's always very difficult. You have no idea what you're going to be playing against unless you did some pre-scouting in the room. But like I said, with my store being super competitive, and I didn't instantly recognize this player, no one was freely talking about their decks. There was just rumors about what people had brought, but no specifics were shown as of yet. Luckily, we did draw into a Baboom, and I chose to keep it in my hand. So to start off the tournament, we did our classic, just play the Popsicle. I also inked something from blue, not to give away if I'm playing blue steel or red blue. This is a common tactic we use when playing a blind match to not give away too much information, and it paid off, because when it came to our opponent's turn, the first thing that they inked was a green Ursula, and then for their one drop, they actually played the steel Robin Hood. So instantly I knew I was going up against Emerald Steel, and then I kind of took some liberty assuming this would be the full bells and whistles discard deck. So I knew I needed to have removal in my hand and play a little bit slower, trying to play just the cards that help draw and replace themselves. I think on turn 2 the Bucky came down, which at this point was to be expected. I actually had 2 Babooms in my hand at this point in time, so in order to prevent a shift Robin Hood on turn 3, I actually Baboomed the Robin Hood to start, also to give my opponent a little bit of false confidence to be able to play their Diablo. Turn 3, when they played it, I instantly countered with the Baboom, and from there, we did a really good job of playing our Cloud Kicker, playing our Cogsworth, making our side of the board immune to the targeted spells that Steel has, while also resisting things like Tinkerbell or Grab Your Swords, and we were able to quickly close out the game, getting to 20 lore. Game 2 definitely played out a little bit differently. Being on the draw, we were actually able to mulligan into a Along Came Zeus, as well as a Baboom. The opponent this time was able to play their Ursula Deceiver, meaning I had to reveal my hand and get rid of the Along Came Zeus, but they did see that I did have Baboom there waiting for them, and as long as I held it in my hand, they were forced to not play their Diablo. I think I also did a little bit of trickery where I might have Fishbone Quilled it, because at that point I just wanted to get to the higher ink total since they weren't playing it. And then once we got our board up and running, the opponent actually ran out of cards in their hand, and we just held on to a whole new world to keep the board state as static as possible. And then I just responded to whatever they played that turn. Eventually we closed out this game with a Tamatoa Lucky Dime combo, and we secured ourselves a 2-0 victory against Emerald Steel. So after this game, I was feeling super good. We were able to 2-0 the very expensive top meta threat of Emerald Steel. My Cloud Kicker deck helped so much in this matchup, really disrupting what the other player wanted to do. They weren't able to use basically any action besides Grab Your Sword, and we were able to get to such a big lead that really at any time, like game 2, we were able to just close it out in one turn with Tamatoa. Moving on to game 2, we were now towards the front of the room at the top tables since we did win 2-0. We were technically ranked second at the time, going up against the number 1 person in the room who also went 2-0. So this time, game number 1, we were on the draw, and we quickly found out turn 1 we were going to be playing up against Ruby Amethyst. The one deck that I've practiced the most against, knew it was going to be very heavily played in this tournament, and here it was game 2 at one of the top tables, and unfortunately this was the worst drawn game of Lorcana that I have ever played competitively. In the deck we ran 3 Grab Your Swords and 2 Along Came Zeus, 4 Babooms, and I didn't see a single one of those cards, even with playing 2 Whole New Worlds. So unfortunately, we weren't able to deal with their Flynn Riders because we had no targeted removal and he wouldn't quest it. He was also able to play the Sisu that got bigger with our hand size, which we kept in check for a while by playing Argies. But without any removal, it just got to a point where I had to start attacking his characters, and then we were always playing behind in the tempo. And if you don't draw into your removal with a removal-based deck, you kind of just lose the game. But game number 2, we were going to be on the play, and this deck is set up incredibly well to do a turn 3 Cloud Kicker Whole New World to completely disrupt what your opponent is planning to do. And yet again, one of the worst mulligan draws I've ever gotten. I kid you not, we had 3 one-jump aheads in our hand, and I had already sent one back from the initial draw, which being on the play really means I can get to the ink totals I want with having to ink on any given turn, which typically would be good, but also I didn't see a Whole New World or a Hiram at all in this game. There was at one point in this game where I couldn't play any characters. My opponent literally told me I can't play anything either because I have 3 Be Prepareds. So if you have a Whole New World, I actually would appreciate it at this point. He did eventually play a Be Prepared in a pretty funny scenario. I had no characters on my board. He had nothing to play because his hand was full of just removal. And on his side of the board, he had 2 rabbits and a goat. So he actually just played Be Prepared, drew the 2 cards, got the extra lore, and then drew into cards that actually helped him close out the game. But at the end of the day, what really went wrong with this game 2 was finally we were able to get set up towards the end of the game, and he wasn't at too big of a lead. I had a Cloud Kicker on the board, and I had just played a Bell, meaning that we were going to close out the game in this next turn. And then our opponent dropped the big Sisu, which we were completely not expecting, as it's not something our local players were using at all, but I know it was something at Fort Worth, which our opponent actually admitted that's where he picked it up from. And because Cloud Kicker has 2 strength and Bell has 2 strength, our board was wiped. We couldn't answer anything he had, and we ended up just having to forfeit the game. So that one was a little bit disappointing, but we still were 1-1, playing towards the top half of the room. Because my game didn't go the full 45 minutes, I did have a chance to get up, walk around the room, kind of scout out what everybody was playing. And I kid you not, 70% of the room was playing the most meta versions of Ruby Amethyst. At one point, tables 1 through 6 were all mirror matches of just Ruby Amethyst and a single Emerald Steel player. But moving on to round 3, of course, no surprise here. We went up against another Ruby Amethyst deck. This one wasn't running the Sisu, wasn't running the Peter Pan Rush adaptation that people have been adding in. This was your cookie cutter standard Ruby Amethyst. And I have to admit, this is the only match where I was actually disappointed in my performance, as I feel this was definitely the deciding factor for what kept us out of top 8. And looking back, if I had made a couple different moves, we would have guaranteed our way into top 8. But all we can do is learn from that and take it to our next event. So let's talk about what happened in this matchup. So once again, we lost the dice roll, and game number 1, we were on the draw, putting us at the disadvantage. This game though did work out very similar to what I was expecting. They were running Be King Undisputed and Lady Tremaine, which we didn't know at the time, as our last opponent ran Madame Medusa and more targeted removal. So unfortunately, we were caught off guard in game 1, and I got a Cloud Kicker removed very early off the board because he was the only character that I had in place on turn 4, and they just played Be King Undisputed straight up. The same thing happened when we played a Hiram. They had a brawl instantly to answer it, so that went right away. And then the big mistake that I made in this game was we were getting closer to the end of the game. I had more than enough items on the board to do a Tamatoa dime play, or even just get a Bell on the board and tap her with a dime. But our opponent had a pretty scary board state, and I desperately needed a Rise of the Titans to get rid of a Queen's Castle. So I made a big misplay, and I used a Whole New World. Not only did I not draw into my Rise of the Titans, but my opponent was able to draw into 2 goats, which in one turn, they were able to put all of them down, overtake us in the lore totals, and they ended their turn at 18 lore with a Queen's Castle, 2 goats on the board, meaning our last hope was to finish it out in one turn, try and get 7 lore in one swing, and unfortunately, we weren't able to find the Tamatoa. We had all the removal to get rid of everything at this point. I had a Rise of the Titans for Queen's Castle, and then I had a character on board that could sing, grab your sword, and play a Tinkerbell. But because there were goats on board, they would have automatically got the 20, so we ended up losing game 1. Game number 2, we were on the play, and I thought for sure this game was over well before we had truly gotten going. Starting off, our opponent ended up drawing into Flynn and double Sisu, meaning not only were they questing for 2 each time, unless I answered it, they were going to be getting 3 with Flynn every turn. And once again, we had 1 jump ahead. This time though, we had an Argus on the board, which bought us a little bit of time. And luckily, even though our opponent got up to 14 lore very quickly due to their early cards, they actually weren't able to draw into their goats or some of their later removal, meaning that when we eventually got to 12 lore ourselves, they were 1 turn away from winning. Luckily for us, in this game, we had pulled our Great Stone Dragon, meaning that every time one of our characters was removed, it wasn't the end of the world because they were going into our inkwell, which was great because it actually increased our ink totals all the way up to 17, which is normally super high, but there was a ton of removal that happened during the middle part of this game. And with 17 ink, we were actually able to play Tamatoa for 8, play Lucky Dime for 7, and for the last 2, tap the Lucky Dime and go from 12 to 20 in 1 turn. So after mounting an incredible comeback on game 2, this is where our second big mistake of this match happened. Now, for some backstory, the way that these rounds work is you get 45 minutes to play a best of 3. If you're unable to finish a best of 3 in 45 minutes, the tournament does have overtime rules where you and your opponent will exchange back and forth for 5 turns, and if a winner is not decided, the game will just not count. So if you guys had split the previous games 1-1, that means the match will be recorded as a draw. If you guys were only on game 2, then whoever won the first game would actually win the match outright. So we started this game with 4 minutes on the clock, and because I was playing Sapphire Steel, I knew there was no way that I could win the game that quickly. Unfortunately, my opponent had other ideas, and they were actually playing their turn 1 play as I was still drawing my 7 cards before I'd even thought about mulliganing. In hindsight, I should have played at my own pace. I got a little peer pressured from people gathering around our table, encouraging us to speed up because the time was running out, and this led to a lot of mistakes. I actually don't remember much about what happened in this game because I was purely just focused on trying to prevent my opponent from getting 20 lore before the 5-turn exchange was up. And unfortunately for us, on turn 4, which is under our control, the opponent got to a board state where if I didn't answer, they would get to 20, and we didn't draw into any of our removal cards at that point. So we had to pass back to them, and on the last possible turn, they were able to secure the win. And this is what truly might have knocked us out of contention for getting into the top cut. Looking back, I definitely should have played at the correct pace that I was used to playing at, even though there's pressure to get as many turns in before the overtime rules took effect, especially with the style of deck that I was playing. I'm not playing something where I can win in 3-4 turns, whereas on a very good draw, Ruby Amethyst can get out to a massive lead and close out a game quickly if we don't have things to answer it, which we unfortunately didn't in the 3 turns that we had, meaning now our record was 1-2. So there was still a chance that we could get into the top 8, but it wasn't looking so good for us, especially now that we'd be matched up against players that were on the lower side of the bracket. Round 4 was probably the single most fun I had in the entire day. I played a mirror match against Sapphire Steel, but we had 2 completely different deck lists. I was playing the classic Tamatoa, Lucky Dime, get a bunch of items, tap and win the game. But my opponent was playing Grandma Tala, singing songs to put things into your inkwell with Mama Odie, and they were just trying to get as much ink into their inkwell as possible in a single turn. And when I tell you our first game, we took 30 minutes going to the bottoms of our deck. Both of us almost milled out at the very end of the game. I had 5 cards remaining. They had 8 cards remaining, so if they pulled a whole new world, we would have actually lost the game. But I had so much fun in this specific matchup, especially just trying to solve a puzzle that I've never played against personally in real time live, was something that really re-energized myself through the day and really boosted my confidence that if we did make it to the top cut, we'd be able to perform well. Now, with us winning game 1, we were starting game 2 with 15 minutes on the clock, and given how long the first game took, I knew there was no way that we were going to be getting 2-3 games, but I wanted to do the right thing, play at a respectable pace. At this point, the chances of us making it to the top cut were not the greatest, so I just wanted to have a great time playing against this really creative deck list that my opponent came up with. But somehow, this was the perfect game for me. I drew into my Kick Cloud Kicker Whole New World combo. On turn 3, we were able to get rid of Big Grammatala from their hand, and also get rid of some of the removal. Because they were playing Steel, my opponent was actually having a hard time removing any of my kits from the board because all they had was Let the Storm Rage On, Along Came Zeus, but they couldn't target my kits, my Cogsworth, or my Ariel, and we were able to get them all out on the board. And very quickly, we were up to 15 lore, and our opponent was still at around 3 or 4. With about 5 minutes on the clock left, we had gotten to a state where I think I was at 15 lore, and I had just played my Ariel, meaning all I had to do was either just quest or play a Lucky Dime and tap the dime, and I'd be able to secure the win. When out of nowhere, my opponent played 3 item removing cards. He played 2 Benja and a Rise of the Titan to completely clear out my board, meaning now Ariel would only quest for 3, and we actually couldn't win in that turn, opening up the window for my opponent to snag a victory. All they had to do was have enough ink to play their Friends Like Me card and a Grammatala, and they'd win the game. But unfortunately, because we weren't playing a whole new world a lot in this game, our opponents never saw the big Grammatala when they needed it, and on this particular turn, they were 1 ink short from pulling off their combo, passing it back to me at 19 lore. During that turn, I will say, I had a lucky dime in my hand because I had just pulled it back with a Tamatoa that got removed, and my opponent knew this. So he played Whole New World, forcing me to get rid of the card, and at this point they had like 20 ink on the board. They weren't able to get lore for it because we played around the Grammatala pretty well, but their turns seemed to last forever, and I was sure that I was losing and we were going to draw 1-1. So when the pass came back to me with him having 19 lore, I luckily, even though we discarded a lucky dime with the Whole New World, we were able to draw into our second one, and funny enough, that was the only item we had drawn in that Whole New World. So as soon as we played it, our opponent knew the game was over. We quested the aerial because we had more items than our opponent now, snagging victory from what I thought for sure was defeat in this round. And that was another 2-0 victory that we'd have, which was giving me a little bit more hope for some of the tiebreaker scenarios that we'd get into. Now on to round number 5, the final round of Swiss at our particular tournament. Like I said earlier in the video, unfortunately, as I started playing, I did see everyone at the top tables all start putting away their stuff. They never actually even started, they all just intentionally drawed, which meant that unless there was some hidden tiebreaker that wasn't posted on the Melee rules, we would be on the outside looking in at the end of the game, regardless of what our decision was. Even still, me and my opponent agreed to play out the full 3 matches. In this match, we were playing up against Amethyst Steel, and this match went pretty similar to our first match of the day against Emerald Steel. The power of Kick Cloud Kicker not being able to be selected for actions makes the mirror match into a Steel game a slam dunk for us. As soon as we're able to get those cards on the board, the opponent's really not able to answer. And I do apologize because I don't remember specifics from the first 2 games in this round. But for round number 3, we actually drew into 2 Cogsworths and a Fishbone Quill. So on turn 4, we already had our first Cogsworth out, played our second Cogsworth on turn number 5, sang a Whole New World with our first one, and now the Cogsworths protected themselves with the Resist 1, so it was going to be really hard to get them off the board. Then we added cards like Kit and Bell to the board, allowing us to quickly close out the game, get to 20 lore, and secure our 3rd victory of the day. We handed in our score sheet, and we waited for the last games to finish up, and unfortunately, when the pairings came out for the quarterfinals, we had finished 9th place, right outside the top 8 cut. Definitely disappointed that we were kept out because of some gamesmanship, but if I'm being completely honest, I don't blame them. I probably would have taken the deal too. You guarantee yourself into the knockout stages, and then at the end of the day, that's pretty much what we're all there for. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap of our set championships. I want to thank my local game store, Fast Break, Trading Cards, and Memorabilia for putting on the event. I know it's definitely a long day for these card shops, especially when you have to run so many rounds of Swiss and then 4 more rounds to determine the winner. Shop owners are going to be there, sometimes past their operating hours, and I really wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to support the community. And just to wrap up this video, I'm not salty about the situation. At the end of the day, it's just a card game. We're there to have fun. I hope you guys learned something from this video, and next time we'll just make sure that we get 4 wins so we avoid the situation entirely. Hit the subscribe button to help us reach 500 subs. You guys have been killing it lately, and we are well on our way to hitting that goal. Coming up in the next weeks, we do have more episodes of Quest for 2, our weekly kitchen table gameplay series, and very exciting because we have a new set. We're going to be doing some sealed product battles in that series. Stay tuned for more Lorcana content. We'll be covering all the new cards coming to Disney Lorcana with Shimmering Skies on August 9th. And we'll even put together some fun meta decks that you might see at your next set championship. I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend, fantastic month of July, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya!